Web UI components for business applications. This is part 2 of our little series of videos that we currently produce. Part 2 has the wonderful title, Rendering Client in Action. And I am still Björn Müller. I'm still founder and core developer behind the Captain Casa UI framework. Let's get into the content. With part 1, we introduced the concept of a rendering client architecture to be suitable for a big part of the UIs, of the dialogs that you have to write for complex business applications. You remember we differentiated between long-living business applications, which have a life cycle of 10, 15, 20 years, where core parts of the screens, especially these ones for the employees and power users, have to be kept stable during this life cycle. And we identified this concept, rendering client concept, as a very suitable one. Why? Because in the rendering client, this is a technical rendering client, which is receiving a layout from the server side, from the dialog processing side. It renders it. It passes back certain events to the server side, data changes, button pressing, menu pressing, whatever, so that the actual dialog processing is on server side, and it's only the rendering aspect of layouts, of dialogs, which is kept on client side. The main focus of part 1 was to explain that due to this stable interface that we have here between the rendering client and the application dialog processing, we have a good chance to exchange or to adapt the architecture of the rendering client through this long life cycle of the application. Yeah, so if, for example, in our case, we started 2007 with a Swing client based on this concept, we replaced it by a JavaFX client in 2012. We replaced it by an HTML JavaScript client in 2017. So you can follow the technological changes on the client side without rewriting your application. Yeah. You don't have a hell of application code in the front end, JavaScript code, which is close to the application. This is pure technical rendering code, while all the dialog and the application code is on server side. Well, this may all sound a bit abstract and may have sounded a bit abstract. So the purpose of this session is to give a little bit feeling in this and how does it look like, how does it feel, and how does development look like. So that's what I want to briefly show. I show it, of course, with our own framework, but you could also find very parallel things in other frameworks. I just mentioned Vardin, for example, which is a well-known framework, and Eclipse RCP is a similar framework. So we are not the only ones swimming in this nice water. But what you now see is you will see the browser, and you don't have to see this. The browser here we started, it's a URL going to our demo server, and the first thing I call the main page of our demo. And you see it, it's coming up. Well, and we could now say, okay, we can state hello world and stock overview and whatever, and we can check how many controls we have. All this is not relevant in this video. We want to look into the technology, which is between the client and the server processing. So pure technology is always seen with the F12 key. This is the developer view of the browser, and it's quite nice to get an impression because you see what's going on. Well, I already opened the network view here, and I want now to see all network transfer between the client. Yeah, and I do a Control F5 in the browser to really refresh all the things so that everything is reloaded, so that you see the complete truth behind. So this is a URL, workplace.risk, and this one is this request. So the browser is communicating to the server with a certain URL, and the server passes back, this is the HTML page to be displayed. And looking into this HTML page, you will find out this is a typical single-page application page. So you don't see in this response all the controls here. You just see it is a page loading certain JavaScript programs. Yeah. And in this one, you have some div, so to speak, some area, which is covering, in this case, the whole screen. And in this one, all the rendering takes place. So the JavaScript program is started. And after being started, the JavaScript program contacts the server and says, hey, what should I display? What is my first layout to be displayed? So this communication, you see in this list by filtering it. And this is an option to only see the communication which was initiated by the JavaScript. And here we only see the post operations. These are the ones where data is exchanged. So these are data calls from the client to the server. What does the server tell the client? So we look into the response, and in this response, we see a big XML definition of the layout, which is rendered now on the client side. So a lot of controls, and it's far too much to see any good content out of. So I will do a simpler demo here, Hello World. And in this Hello World demo, things are nicer observable. So all the things, it's the same rendering client. Yeah, it just now receives a more simple layout than the previous one. Let's look into communication. We see here, this was the call to the server, and the server is now responding with an XML. This XML, for example, contains a tab pane tab with a title demo, another tab pane tab with a title layout. So exactly what you see here. Yeah, and here we have some field with the ID, whatever G4, and we have a label with a G12. Yeah, so the field here, this is this field, and the label is not rendered yet. It has no content. There's no text yet. It's not visible yet. Okay, no. So let's check what's going on the network level. So if I click here and switch between the tabs, there's no network communication because this is local operation. The client, it does not need to tell the server about. Yeah. Same if you go to the demo and you input some characters, AAA here. Yeah. You see certain things are happening. This label is moving up from the title's moving from here to the left top. Yeah. But there's no network communication. If I press the button, of course, say hello, then a network communication is done. It's this step here. And let's look in the sending of data. What did the client send to the server? It said, okay, there was in the field G4, maybe you remember the ID. There was a new data content, which is AAA, yeah, and with the button G8, there is an action invoke, so it was pressed, yeah, and there are certain parameters like the pixel position, if the shift or the click or the alt key was pressed, and whatever, yeah. Good. The server responds now, and the response of the server is, first of all, it's much shorter because the server only sends back changes. So for example, for all these 4 areas here, 1, 2, 3, 4, it just says no change, yeah, nothing to do, nothing to render. Yeah. So on the one hand, it's a very compact data volume, which is exchanged from the server to the client. On the other hand, the rendering exactly knows I don't have to change anything in these areas. Yeah. So it's a very fast update of the screen. It's only updating these parts which are changing. Now, what we also see is in this label, yeah, the text change, G12, this one, and also in this label, even on component definition, you see only the text change. So the label has another attributes. For example, where was it in the first request? We had the label here, yeah, so it was some accessible name for screen reader, some alignment, and whatever. All these attributes did not change. So only these attributes with the second request were sent up to the client, which actually changed. So it's a very smart protocol of XML layout to be rendered, and it's delta based. Yeah, and if you don't change anything at all, if you just say hello without changing data, then you see it's a very minimal answer which is getting back. So looking on the data size, we see the first chunk was 2.7 kilobyte, 874 bytes, 687 bytes. So it's a minimal PNG file also, which is exchanged. So it's a very lightweight protocol, yeah, which is between client and server. The same protocol is exactly the same thing if we now get back to our big demo. Yeah, it's the same client. I just repeated. It just gets a more complex layout. Yeah, the client doesn't care if it's complex or not. Yeah, doesn't know what the semantics of the layout is. Okay, here's a component and a hello world demo. Here's a workplace demo where you can do a lot of things here. But the same principle again. Yes, you have requests which have data, which have layout definitions, and the changes are sent up. So if I say hello world again, yeah, then hello world is loaded. If I input something here, then next request, and so on and so forth. So no changes in the request size, in the request protocol. And you see also, if I just don't change any data, you see the size of request is minimal. So the last one was 751 kilobyte, 1.4 kilobyte, 3.5 kilobyte. This is mini images which are exchanged, so to speak. Now we have looked on this protocol between the client and the server side. It would be now a good idea from my perspective to take a look into how do I develop all this, because you might think, okay, how do I now send this layout, and what framework is around to help me sending this, and do I have to do this on my own? Do I have to somewhere assemble the XML on my own, or is it some help? I just want to show you briefly how to develop a page in this scenario, mini business application, so to speak, and that's the purpose here. I don't mention this tool side, so I just mentioned the principle. So you have some tools to now say, okay, on the server side, you create a new layout. And this layout gets a new name. It is for some hello world. I just call it hello. And it's an XML definition, which is kept on server side because it's now a static definition. We could also do it dynamically, but let's keep it with static at the moment. We select the template and we create this layout. And for each layout, there's an XML definition, how it looks like, and there's a program which contains the dialog logic. So this is the program I immediately create. Good. You now see the editor, and in the editor, you see the components, and you say, for example, each component, this is the server-side components, yeah, which then are sent to the client side, and the client-side rendering executes the rendering and transfers them into DOM elements. So this is server-side view. The row title bar has attributes, has many attributes, but the important ones are the ones which are typically used. So a hello, and you can just save this layout and it's updated. Here it's hello. So let's do a little hello world example. I place a row inside. I place a container inside, which is the foldable pane container. Yeah, title. That this is hello title as well. And this container might have a row as content. In the row, I add a field. Yeah, 100% width, and the label text is name. Yeah. And I have a second row at behind row. In this row, I place a button. The button says say hello. And it has a width of maybe 150. And the last thing is at behind a row. And I insert a label because this is the output. Hello world, whatever name is input on the top. So that's the layout. Yeah. In the layout, I say, okay, let's put in the containers between the rows some row distance of 10 so that it looks a bit nicer. Good. We now could spend minutes and minutes for optimizing the layout, but I'm fine with it. Now I want to show how code is linked to this. And always remember, we are just on the server side. So all this, what we now do is server-side programming. And in the server side, we have a program, Hello UI. And this program is still empty. I show it in some seconds to you. So in this program, we now create a property with a name, a string property. And we create the next property, which is the result, also a string property. And we create a method, which is on hello action. On hello action is also good. Yeah. So this is what is created. I go to the Eclipse environment, could of course use IDEA or whatever, NetBeans. There's the Hello UI program, and you see exactly what was created here. Rename a setter getter, result a setter getter, and on hello action, this is the action method. Save. Good. Now, next step before I implement this, I do the binding, because this code at the moment was totally independently defined from the dialog here. So now I have to bind things. I say in the field, the name is the text. From the button, the hello action is the action listener. Yeah, so I do a binding by drag and drop from the right to the left, and in the label, the result is the text. You see, there's a certain expression language, the hello UI, that's the program. Result, this is the property to bind to. I save this, and now I check the coding. I check the coding and say, okay, the name that I have is captain. The result, the initial state is undefined. And I now say the operation when on hello action is executed. I say result equals hello world, comma, plus name, plus exclamation mark. So that's the processing. This is not a real business logic, but that's a quite stupid logic. But please do a certain abstraction. This could be a price calculation or whatever. Anyway, I've coded now the server side. I now load the server with the new code, and I see, this control is field with captain because this is bound to the main property. This is undefined because it's bound to the result property. And if I press the say hello button, then hello world captain is output because that's the content of the name together with hello world. If I now input something like AAAA here, then say hello, then exactly the same happens. There's a request to the server, the changed data is transferred into the properties, the action is executed, the data which is changed is collected and brought back to the client in a delta mode, and that's the result. We now could run this page directly in a separate dialog, so not inside this environment, and you see now it's the first business application page. The business application has, for the dialog, a Java program, and this Java program is, so to speak, the entrance program from the server side into the business logic. So from here, you could use EJBs. From here, you can access any Spring objects. You could access via REST any business logic which you want to decouple on server side by REST calls or whatever. So this is completely up to you. The front-end framework just ensures that you now have a stable architecture for your dialog application. You see, as an application developer, I did not touch the client technology at all. I was working against the layout definition. I was binding my code to this layout definition or against this layout definition. And how this button is rendered, what CSS is required, what JavaScript is required, this is completely out of the scope of the application developer. This is not just in the scope of the rendering client, who is then done by a rendering specialist. Getting back to our lovely slides, we see that this is the concept. I hope you saw that it's a living concept. It's a nice concept. It's a clear concept. So all these things that I said as well are also available with other frameworks. I also mentioned this, yeah. But of course, if you're interested to get more details about what you just saw, then look into www.captaincasa.org and you find a lot of things and a lot of nice information. I say again, thanks for watching and looking forward to see you in our next video. Thanks a lot.